host today's, panel discussion. I think it'll be extremely useful and helpful, particularly for our future faculty, our graduate students and postdocs who are part of the CIRTL network. I'll just make sure that y'all can see this. Again, as Kate said, I'm Brian Rabarzik. I'm Assistant Dean of Academic and Professional Development with the Graduate School at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, one of the 42 CIRTL institutions across the US and Canada now. And I thought, based on some of my own connections with HBCUs and minority serving institutions, I thought this would be a great panel discussion to be able to share across our CIRTL network. So 3 of the 4 of our panelists are part of an NIH-funded program called IRACDA. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. This happens to be a postdoctoral fellowship program. So those of you who are graduate students looking for postdocs, which focuses on the training, both research and teaching training for future faculty. And so this is really a complement to all the great things that CIRTL offers, but wrapped up in a postdoc experience. And of note, the IRACTA programs have the mission to support the diversity of sciences and science careers and science professionals. And so these are institutions who partner with 1 or more minority serving institutions across the US. So there's roughly about 20 or 22 of these programs. And again, 3 of the 4 of our panelists today are part of those programs. So that was part of my motivation as well to reach out to my colleagues through CIRTL, who also happen to have IRACTA programs, to be able to connect some really great faculty and institutions to learn more about what is entailed in terms of careers at these different types of institutions. So as Kate said, CIRTL is inclusive of many institutions across the US and Canada, and looking to expand to even more institutions and more diverse institutions that serve a diverse population of students. So the purpose and goals of today are to really provide our audience with insights into the history, culture, and different unique environments of these higher education institutions, to really learn from faculty experiences who work with diverse student populations, be able to expand your scope of what's possible in terms of your own academic careers, and learn about the insights about the hiring requirements for these different types of institutions. I wanted to share some abbreviations that you may or may not be familiar with. And this is the list. I'm not going to read them, but you may be hearing some of these abbreviations as we talk about through our panel discussion today, or you may see some documentation or labels of different kinds of institutions. So depending on the focus or the population or a certain percentage of population of various institutions, they may be designated as an HBCU or as a tribal college or university or a minority serving institution. So this is really helpful to be able to understand what kinds of populations, different kinds of higher education institutions will serve. Some quick facts about MSIs and HBCUs. They range everything from community colleges to research-intensive universities. And so it's not just one type of institution, but these designations are throughout the hierarchy of higher education. Cheyney University of Pennsylvania was the first HBCU to be established in 1837. Minority serving institutions overall serve well over 40% of underrepresented college students, so large population. And because I'm from North Carolina has actually 6 MSIs, HBCUs throughout our state. And there are several other concentrations of HBCUs across the country. For example, Atlanta, one of our panelists today is from Morehouse College, for example, in DC and California. So those are some of the more concentrated areas of HBCUs and MSIs. There's also some executive orders that reference MSIs. And so these are important government acknowledgements, recognition, and support of MSIs and HBCUs. So you can see these different designations and really clearly providing some governmental support and acknowledgement for these unique historical institutions as part of our higher education system. So now I would like to invite one of our panelists, Dr. Nguyen, to share a land acknowledgement and also some background of her ancestry. So Winona, would you feel free to share?
Thank you, Brian. I'm happy to be here today. I'm here representing not only myself and my community, current community of the Yakama Nation, but my ancestral connections. And you see in the photograph, my great-grandmother on the right-hand side is my namesake, and for generations, Winona, which means firstborn, is passed on from the firstborn daughter to the next generation of firstborn daughter. And although my name is Winona, that's my Indian name, my father also refers to me as a Tatanka dreamer, a buffalo dreamer. And I don't have our Lakota language in full scope to really distinguish between a dreamer for futurist applications or a dreamer in the context of which my father refers to me. So I just leave it at Tatanka dreamer. The woman seated is my great-grandmother, my great-great-grandmother, Mary No Eyes. And the women I represent here are just, representative of such the strength and the fortitude and the survivance, as Vandalaria, or as another Native scholar likes to call the survival of Native people. She's wearing a porcupine breastplate. And so I'll go ahead and read the land acknowledgement. As I said, I'm an enrolled member of my tribe, Assiniboine Sioux in Fort Peck, Montana. My grandmother attended Fort Shaw boarding school. And so this is the acknowledgement for our state. Washington State recognizes several tribes, including the Yakama, Wanapum, and Spokane, among others. We recognize those peoples for whom these were ancestral lands, as well as the many indigenous people who live and work in the region today. And Brian has a wonderful map that you can access to find out the indigenous peoples related to your geography. And I wanted to thank you again for acknowledging the Native peoples of our areas, our geographical spaces.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nguyen, and I really appreciate the picture. It's so helpful and impactful to hear about your history. I would also, again, encourage you to search out to see if your home institution has some type of land acknowledgement. One of our CIRTL institutions, Northwestern, has a written statement on their website. So I encourage you to investigate whether or not your home institution currently, or if you had previous degrees at other institutions, also have some kind of land acknowledgement. So thank you again so much, Winona. All right, so with that, I will allow some time for each of our panelists to introduce themselves for today. And I just have some bullet points to help guide each of you in your introductions, and then we'll start with some of the questions we have for you. So I'll turn it over to Lisa, Dr. Brown, to start our introductions.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lisa Brown. I'm actually now just been thrown into the position of interim chair and associate professor of the biology department. I am also the director of our new Office of Undergraduate Research. And I also am the coordinator of the honors program within our School of Computer, Mathematical, and Natural Sciences. So you can imagine I'm quite busy on a daily basis. In terms of professional, personal background, I'm a New England girl. I grew up in Connecticut, attended University of Rhode Island undergrad, University of Connecticut for graduate school, and then kind of migrated down to Maryland, where Morgan State is located. Did my postdoc at the University of Maryland School of Medicine. What attracted me to this institution, I actually started teaching at Morgan part-time as a postdoc to get some teaching experience. At that time, I wasn't very familiar with any of the teaching academies at my institution or centers of excellence in teaching and learning. So I opted to teach part-time at night to get some teaching experience at Morgan State University. And Morgan actually offered me a job. So I kind of fell into a job because of my performance in terms of learning how to teach at Morgan. Something unique about this institution, culture history, it's a historically Black college or university. I wouldn't call it small, but we're about 8,000 students total, 6,000 undergraduates, and continuing to grow. We're also categorized as an R2 institution, striving to be R1. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Next up is Dr. Lawrence.
Thank you, Brian. I'm the other Brian, referring to my email from this morning. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. I appreciate that everyone's here. I'm actually looking forward to this panel. I'm taking notes from my colleagues. I'm a professor, associate professor of chemistry at Morehouse College. I've been there for about 15 years. I wear a number of hats, as I'm sure many of us do at our institutions, but Morehouse being a small liberal arts college, a lot of the things that I do as a professor in STEM still step outside of that. I'm the director of the Morehouse Makerspace Exploration Center. I'm the chair of the College Judiciary Committee, which is the one way you don't want to leave college, as they say. So those are some of my current roles and responsibilities there. Professionally, I came into academia from industry. It was sort of an unintentional postdoc. I had interviewed for the position I have here at Morehouse while I was still a graduate student, and then understanding something about the culture of the space that I understand now. I know why it took so long for them to give me a job offer, but in the meantime, I look for an industrial employment, because something that's important to know about me is the first hat I wear is dad. I have 4 kids. My eldest are twins. They were born when I was in graduate school. I started my educational journey as a chemist back in high school, although I didn't know it at the time. I went to Long Beach Poly High School. I'm from the West Coast, and went to college out there at the University of California, Berkeley, where I studied chemistry. My graduate degree is in organic chemistry from Harvard University, where I worked with Eric Jacobson. Again, I did a short stint in the pharmaceutical industry before coming to Morehouse in the spring of 2006, where I've enjoyed teaching our particular brand of student to talk about the institution's uniqueness. Morehouse is, I believe, the country's only historically Black college for men. And I say men broadly defined, right? And so one of the things that we challenge our students to do is to grow into the metaphorical crown that we place above their heads, right? So that they can, they earn the right to wear it, so to speak. Why I wanted to come to Morehouse is something I have to articulate often. And one of the ways that I like to state this is quite plainly, you water the ground where the seeds are. And as a Black man in STEM, who was the first actually African-American to earn the graduate degree in organic chemistry from Harvard in its over 400-year history, understands that there's a responsibility that I have to sort of give back. And Morehouse College is a great institution to do that with. Point of fact, the only other Black men who have attended Morehouse to earn degrees outside of that educational space all came from Morehouse. So I think I'm in good company, and not only there, but I think here as well.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. Next up is Dr. Rory.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. So I am Chicory. I'm an associate professor at North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. And I'm also the chair of the Department of Biology. We have a fairly large department here, with our largest enrollment of freshmen this past year of over 300 new freshmen. So we have 750 students in our major here at North Carolina A&T. I'm also the director of our MARC program, which stands for Maximizing Access to Research Careers. I was a MARC student when I was in undergrad at Clark Atlanta University. So that's where I graduated with my degree in biology in 1998. I then attended UNC Chapel Hill, where I received a PhD in toxicology. From there, I did 2 postdocs. So my first postdoc was a short postdoc at New York University in the Department of Biochemistry. My focus is cancer research. I was doing research on cancer stress response systems during that time. And I did a second postdoc back at UNC Chapel Hill in the SPIRE program, which is part of the IRACTA programs. And that's where I actually met Dr. Brian, the first Brian, many, many years ago. And from that particular program, I actually, as part of the program, you do adjunct teaching, which my appointment was here at North Carolina A&T in the Department of Biology. They asked me to stay on originally as an adjunct. From an adjunct, I then joined a tenure track position and then became chair this past year. So what attracted me to my current institution, I'm originally from North Carolina, Marshville, North Carolina, which is about 45 minutes outside of Charlotte. If you've ever watched The Color Purple, it was filmed in Marshville. So that's my hometown. So it's location, and then just, mainly location. And then North Carolina A&T at the time was growing. And that is one unique thing about North Carolina A&T. We are the largest HBCU with over 13,000, roughly 13,300 students. And we are on our way as a goal to reach 14,000. And we are a Research 2 institution looking to move to Research 1. I do have a breast cancer research laboratory here at North Carolina A&T.
Great, thank you, Chico. And the fourth panelist we have today is Dr. Nguyen.
Hello again. I wanted to also include a greeting that we're compelled to connect with one another in native ways. And it used to be kind of a joke with my mother, who's non-native, with my father, who would show up in any location geographically and ask people if they knew, Ernie Bighorn from Fort Peck. And so it's a way to try to connect with people. And so I really appreciate Henry Louis Gates Jr., Skip Gates, when he says, we're all related, we're cousins. And so if I had my sign like he does occasionally on gatherings, I'd hold it up to say, welcome cousins, welcome to this gathering. And so Ella Deloria, which is the mother of a native scholar, Vine Deloria, and Vine Deloria Jr., said in her book, find a way to be related to everyone you know. So I want to make sure that I have that as a task today, to know something personal about each person in this group, in this gathering. My current roles at Heritage and my responsibilities vary and cross the border of the community, the Native community in which we're located. We're centered on the Yakima Indian Reservation, the largest reservation in Washington, federally recognized reservation in Washington State. And I am a professor of humanities, ethnic studies, and Native American education, but my responsibilities really flow into the community, where I'm an advocate for tribal court with a program called CASA, which is like an guardian ad litem, but in a Native sense. And so I advocate for the children in our foster care and Naknawisha program. My other responsibilities to my children, I'm glad that Brian mentioned his father role as being up there in the top role that he is caring for and is responsible in that way, in a loving way to his family. I have 4 children. I came late to academia. I raised them in poverty. I didn't have an education up until I was in my 30s. And so I really value those experiences and those stories, but I always knew from my mother's reading to me, she's an intellectual, but not an educated intellectual. She's a philosopher and an intellectual in a lay context. Ironically, she lived in Menlo Park next to Stanford University on Berkeley Avenue. So she must have absorbed lots of those vibes from the professor she passed by as a 16-year-old. And so I'm responsible for my granddaughter, who I adopted. So she's officially my daughter. I adopted her at 4 months. She was a relative that was without a home. And so I'm a new parent, a new academic in many ways. And my cultural responsibilities are also to the individual elders and the students that we have, excuse me, as 12% of our population at Heritage University, which is 708 undergraduate students. We're about 11 to 12% Native students and 85% Hispanic. Latino, Latina is what our community continues to refer to themselves in that way. And they, not many embrace the term Latinx. So that's just a geographical space comment. My professional and personal background and journey, I'm going to conflate that with what attracted you to your current institution, because it's my nature to tell a story. And so I'll make this a very brief story. But when I graduated with my PhD from Washington State University in American Studies with a specialty area in Native identity and Native education, my whole goal was to go to my tribal college, which my cousin founded on Fort Peck Reservation, and to teach there and then decide what I wanted to do beyond that point. And so I had a trunk full of photos. One of them you saw at the beginning of this session, and I have more photos from my father, and I was headed up there. And I got a call quickly from my anthropology professor at a friend at University of Montana who said, can you go to this Yakima reservation place? There's an elder who wants to talk about this food sovereignty grant. I don't have time. Will you please go and be there in my place? Just go to the longhouse on the reservation, show up, and she'll be there shortly. She's a descendant of Chief Kamayakan of the treaty signing. So don't be late, even though it's the stereotype that Native people don't mind being late. Don't you be late. She's very important and very punctual. So I showed up at the longhouse, and there were 5 ovens. And before I saw any people, I saw one person strolling through that said, what are you doing here? That was an elder, did not know me, but I did not see a twice Kamayakan. So these turkeys were coming in for this dinner. It was in November, and they were sitting on the counter. And so I thought, well, I better start putting these in these ovens because I'm going to bake these and I'm going to see that nobody gets food poisoning, whatever this dinner is tonight. So pickup trucks were lining up in front of the longhouse, which is the sacred gathering place for the ceremony on Sundays and other times for traditional feasts. And so I cooked all these turkeys, and I'm greasy from head to toe. And a twice comes in and she says, we're going to this university on our campus, and I want to introduce you to people, and just come and enjoy the dinner. And I tried to tell her I wasn't appropriately dressed, and I was grease laden, and I was sweating, and I was, tired of turkey at that point. 4 hours later, and she insisted I come. So I sat down at the back table at that university dinner, and was given a package of dried salmon by one of the traditional fishermen as a gift for my coming. And he said, this is to keep you sustained on your journey because I know you'll be back. And I said, no, I'm headed to Fort Peck. I'm stopping by here. As soon as the evening's over, I'm headed up to Poplar, Montana. And so at that point, the president and founder of Heritage University was at the dinner, and she came over and she said, I'd like to introduce myself. I don't know you, but Simon Sampson seems to think you're a person of high esteem, giving you his smoked salmon. So I want to talk to you for a minute. And so that started my journey to Heritage. It was a very, a pathway that took me away from what I thought was my higher purpose. But when I got to the reservation, I sat with an elder in a burger place on the edge of the reservation, and she said to me, you're related to people in this community. And so I said, no, Montana, Arizona, not Washington State. There's no way. And she was looking at obituary, and it said Winona, Win. And she said, no, the same name. There's not a coincidence here. You're related. And there's another Winona Win I want to introduce you to in Wapato, which is on the reservation. And just for your enjoyment, Wapato means potato. And there's a long story about the cultivation of potatoes in our area. But I went to the door, and the person who answered the door opened up the door, and I said, oh, I'm so embarrassed. I'm so sorry. I know we're not related, but Patsy Whitefoot insists we are. And I have pictures in the trunk that I'll show you and see if you recognize anyone. She said, I don't need you to show pictures. I know you from here to here. Your father from here to here. She said, come in and let's tell stories. And so she was my father's first cousin who went up to Fort Peck, married a Yakima who happened to be working there, and then came back to the Yakima reservation and started her family and continued several generations of Yakima and Assiniboine children. And so unbeknownst to me, I was coming home to serve my people. I had no idea, no plan. And so it wasn't anything in my broadest consciousness. So I wasn't attracted to my current institution. My current institution was attracted to me. And so I came in as the chair of English and Humanities and have continued my work for 15 years. And I'm not there because of anything other than it's my purpose, defined purpose, this confluence of messaging and this very real invitation that came from a larger source than myself. Something unique about my institution's cultural history, you can add one more acronym, Brian, to that list, and it's called Native American Serving Non-Tribal Institution. And we are one of 2 institutions in the United States who are both Hispanic serving institutions with our 85% Hispanic, and Native American non-tribal serving institutions. We're one of 2. The other one is located in the Southwest. One other interesting fact about our culture and history is that woman that came to me, the founding president of Heritage University, she's a MacArthur Fellow. She was awarded the fellowship because of her work in education and her founding of our university. And I had no idea this was going to come to pass, but I was there and I adopted my relative, and her godmother is the founder of our university. So it came full circle. She asked to be my daughter's godmother, and so my adopted daughter's godmother. So those are two interesting facts unique about our institution. And that's all. Well, not all, but that's where the story ends for now. Thank you.
Thank you all for those wonderful introductions. So I just wanted to give everybody just kind of an agenda for our panel discussion today. It'll be in two parts. So for the next 30 minutes or so, we'll cover some general topics about research, teaching, and mentoring. So I have some set questions for our panelists, and any or all can jump in as they see fit. But we'd also like questions from our audience. And so either raising your hand or typing questions in the chat that we'll be monitoring. And then at the top of the hour, we'll have an opportunity for smaller groups of you to interact with each of our panelists. And so we'll do 2 rounds, and so of 15 minutes each. And we'd like for those rounds to be more focused on applying what the application process is like, and any advice you have for our future faculty. And so with that, I will start off the questions focused on research. And so we'll take maybe about 5 or 7 minutes or so on this topic for any and all of our panelists to talk more about what are the expectations for research productivity at your institution, what kinds of support is available, or common grants that faculty typically earn at your institution or in your department. So maybe Lisa, maybe we can start with you and then others can jump in.
Sure, I was just about to speak. In terms of when we're interviewing for new positions within our department or even within our school, one of the things that we look for in terms of someone coming in with aspirations to be a professor who's doing research and involving students in their research is that they have a research project or that they can actually bring with them and kind of come in hitting the ground running. So it's kind of expected that they might have some collaborations that are kind of already in progress or are developing. Perhaps they're able to collaborate with some of the researchers at some of the local institutions. Morgan is located right in between University of Maryland School of Medicine and Johns Hopkins University. So perhaps they have collaborations that they can start to develop with local researchers so that they come in and they can start being productive right away in terms of their research. In terms of the teaching, you know, we're a little bit more lenient in terms of the teaching when they first come in. They'll have some release time in terms of not having to have a full teaching schedule as soon as they come in, to give them time to really spend developing their research, getting that off the ground, getting students involved, and developing some collaborations, and writing grants also. My institution has very few resources in terms of common grants that they'll be able to apply for at our institution. So they're really expected to write for grants for funding externally. We do have some startup funds, of course, when they come to Morgan, but during that first year, their primary focus is on the research productivity in terms of getting their research up and going, including students and postdocs, and writing grants to support their research interests.
So I'm going to jump in next, if I may, in part due to the question that came up in the chat. When we think about research productivity, wet lab research, which is what you essentially train for, versus, you know, scholarship in teaching and learning, for example, I think it really depends on the institution you're at. You know, Morehouse is a liberal arts college, and so the expectations that you produce a program that does cutting edge research that expands the field is just not present, right? And so, but what still does exist is an expectation that you build a program around something. And typically, if you're in the STEM space, that program is around research training. Students that go to graduate school and then go on to postdocs and ultimately in academia that train as scientists have to have a certain skill set when they step in the door at graduate school, and real or imagined, that skill set is going to involve certain experiences. And so one of the things that we look for in terms of new faculty and new faculty hiring, and I guess I'll make a plug to this group, Morehouse's chemistry department will be looking to hire in the next academic cycle to start in not fall 22, but fall 2023. So if any of you guys are chemists, send me an email, drop me a resume. I'd be happy to take a look at it. But that said, the thing that we look for is, can an individual step into the program and develop a research idea that's sustainable over time, that can engage undergraduates in the types of experiences that support research careers. I oftentimes like to talk about where we exist in the liberal arts space as being in the understory of a forest, right? Where the R1s and the R2s are the giant trees, right? You can imagine who like the rodents and stuff might be. Maybe that's us, I don't know. but within the understory, there's a very vibrant ecosystem, and it is very necessary and very vital for the health of the forest that the understory still is active, because as it is, the majority of people educated in the United States come from non-research institutions. And so it's not necessarily going to be viewed the same way, but again, that's going to be institution to institution. And part of it also has to do, again, referring to the question from the chat, what the value is depends upon the institutional space you're in. Morehouse doesn't operate on the grants and contracts model, right? There's very little expectation that faculty bring in grants, although the institution is certainly excited when we do. There's a much lower expectation along the lines, in part because the teaching responsibilities are much greater. And I think we've got time to talk about teaching later on, so I won't talk about that right now. One thing I'll step into, just piggyback on this about the other question about funding support. There is a lot of funding support that is essentially designed to support research and research objectives at historically Black colleges, minority serving institutions, tribal colleges, and so on and so forth. Both through the NSF, the Department of Energy has specific programs that are geared towards this, where they want to support research. Oftentimes the bigger challenge is, do you have the time in your schedule to make sure that you can meet the goals and objectives of that particular grant program? And so that comes down to, how do you balance this? But we'll have time to talk about that a little bit later. I'm sure I can see my colleagues nodding their heads, and so I know they have more to add in.
I can jump in here. So at North Carolina A&T, now for sure, there is an expectation of doing research, writing grants. When I first came, it wasn't so much, but we have really changed a lot in the past 10 years and have really made this push and are trying to research one. And so really over the past 10 years, we have transformed what we're doing in Department of Biology. So we primarily was a teaching institution for a long time, and now we are moved into that research space. So for example, we'll be doing another search. We just hired 2 neuroscientists, and you can imagine that's expensive. And we are about to put a call out for 2 more. So we're trying to make a move in that space. And then we also have recently had hired what we call NTTS, or non-tenure track teaching faculty. So we do have 2 pots now. So one is the research faculty who are tenure track, who write grants and the wet bench type research. And then we have another group of faculty who come in, and that's not expected. It's not required, I'll put it that way. But a lot of them do engage in, I guess you can say, more so the education research space. So that is where they're interested in. It's not even required they do that. But one thing that we're interested in the biology department is education research. So for example, Dr. Lawrence mentioned NSF has what's called HBCU Up, and we have a grant in the department that's part of broadening participation research. and that's education research and trying to basically increase the diversity into sciences. And so we really embrace all of that. And within our department, we count all of that. So if you're doing education research, we count it, even though the expectation, if you're tenure track, you come in and you're doing tenure track wet bench research kind of work, we do have faculty who do both. So not only do they have a wet bench research laboratory in biomedical sciences, but they're also doing research in their courses they teach. So we try to balance all of that, but we do count all of those.
Winona, I just wanted to preface kind of your response, because many of our CIRTL institutions are broad-based and inclusive of non-STEM disciplines, so inclusive of humanities and social sciences and in preparing our future faculty. And so I'm so happy that you're here to share your perspective of what it looks like in non-STEM disciplines.
No, I appreciate so much what Drs. Brown, Lawrence, and Rory have covered with the diversity of how you can get involved in grants, and Dr. Rory, particularly with education crossings with STEM research and wet bench, and then at the education piece of it. So we're also like what several have mentioned, two have mentioned, liberal arts university as far as our definition, but we do exist in a very research-rich geographical space. So we have agriculture, we have, a lot of typical problems that are within the reservation that are health related. And so we do get grants from NIH, NSF, and then we have sub-awards from our large research institutions in our region. So University of Washington, University of Oregon, Washington State University, and then also partnerships with institutions across the country. One with UVA, who came and whose graduate students came and taught at our labs, because we are a very undersourced, research laboratory with so to speak, in our valley. And so really quickly, I also wanted to say, I forgot to mention I'm chair of the IRB, so our institutional review board. And so much of the research that goes on, we do have respectful reciprocity with our research institutions. If they have researchers coming into our community, they do have an interinstitutional agreement with us so that we make sure that we cover the cultural diversity aspects and respect for the people that they are studying or that they want to include in their study. And so that's another part of how we monitor or include people in diverse approaches to cultural populations. And so research productivity is pretty heavily, well, for our size of an institution, we're very involved with multiple institutions, and we appreciate that. But sub-awards are grants that we offer new people coming in.
Excellent. Thank you for that description of the range of different kinds of research that go on at your institutions. So let's talk a bit about teaching. So what are some of the teaching expectations for faculty? Some of you already touched a bit about on some teaching loads, what are class sizes, and then if you want to address how course release time is handled. So just turn it over to others. Again, as folks in our audience have questions, feel free to raise your hand or put your questions in the chat.
So maybe we can start on the down note, because I probably have the largest teaching load, I would imagine, and then that way it'll only get better. So Morehouse College is a small institution. Our chemistry department has 4 full-time faculty members. We had a 5th who took a job outside in industry, and so that's why we're looking to replace them. But that said, being small, we are both an institution and a program that serves our chemistry majors, of whom we graduate in from 8 to 12 a year, which is commensurate with an institution our size. We have about 2,000 undergraduates. But we also are a service department, because the majors in biology, physics, Morehouse has a dual degree engineering program where students will do 3 years of a pre-engineering program at Morehouse and then transfer to an institution that has an engineering program like Georgia Tech or University of Michigan. There's a number of schools. I want to say, I think it's either NCC or maybe it's NCAT, North Carolina A&T, that has one of the HBCUs, I think, perhaps, that Hampton University, I think, is part of that program as well. But that said, we end up teaching a 4-4 load, which means we'll teach 4 classes in the fall and 4 classes in the spring. And when new faculty join, they teach a 3-3, which is still fairly significant. I know at a lot of research institutions, some faculty will teach a 1-1 or a 2-2 by comparison. One thing that's also important to think about is that at most schools, your teaching load is determined by credit hour or credit hour equivalent, not class size. So I may teach 4 classes this semester. My smallest class has 25 students. I have colleagues that teach 4 classes. Their largest class is 25 students. So it's not an apples to apples comparison, but one of the things that you are understanding if you step into the liberal arts space is that your goal primarily is as an educator, right? You're helping people at the beginning of their educational journey. And in some ways, it's helping them understand the difference between being a student who seeks out sort of proficiencies as laid out by a teacher to turn them into a scholar, somebody that seeks out knowledge for the sake of knowing. And that's something that we sort of take to heart. But, I think my colleagues have very different experiences in the spaces they're in. So I'll go ahead and yield the floor to them.
So at Morgan, it really depends on the department that you're in, the school that you're in. A full load for us is 12 credits. Now, depending on what the class is, so for many of our science classes, there are 4 credits for each class. So that would be 3 classes that a faculty person would have to teach during a semester. Now compare that to someone who's in the psychology department. Their classes are only 3 credits. So full load for them would be 4 classes each semester. So it really depends on the department. But for our faculty, it's a 3-3. And release time, as I said, is determined by many factors. One, for our new faculty, we will release them from 1 class. Well, actually 2 classes, depending on, how productive they can be rather quickly. If they're bringing grants with them as well, we will sometimes release them from 2 classes. 1 class is more like the norm. So they'll be teaching 2 classes while still being setting up their research and getting their research going. Class sizes, we try to keep our class sizes, try to keep them between 35 and 40 students. We don't like to have classes larger than that, but given that our institution is growing, we've had to make some adjustments, and the institution is growing in terms of population, but we're not growing in terms of space yet. So because we're not growing in terms of space, we do have to transfer some of our classes into auditorium style lectures, which really gets away from the style of teaching that we like to do, which is the active learning, doing activities in the classroom. That auditorium style really kind of gets away from our ability to do that. So we try to keep our classes at about 35 to 40 tops. And the biology department is a service department. We provide courses for nursing, physical education, food science, nutrition majors. So we have a lot of our courses that fall under service to the overall community at Morgan State.
So I can talk a little bit about how it is at North Carolina A&T. So a full credit load is 12 credit hours a semester. Depending on the course you teach, we are in biology, so a lot of our courses are 4 credits. Some are 3 credits, and then some are 1 credit. So it depends on what track you come in. So if you're part of the non-tenure track teaching fellow, you could have as many as 5 courses in a semester. It really depends on how that's structured. And so the class, we try to keep the sections down to around 25 to 28. We're growing, so we've had to move that number up a little bit to try to accommodate the number of students. But just like Dr. Brown said, we're limited by space as well. So all of that plays a role in how things are structured. I'm actually working on that as we speak for the spring semester, coming up with the courses and how to assign them. And as far as course release, it depends on if a faculty member has other duties. So if you're brand new, we keep you to 1 course for that first year, 1 course in the fall, 1 course in the spring. try to make it the same course, and that way you're not doing too much prepping, to give you time to kind of get acclimated, get your research going, apply for grants or whatever you need to do. But we do have course release that you can buy out sometime. So if you have grant funds, and you can put in what's called release time, and that then allows us to be able to pay someone to cover some of the hours that you're not able to teach. Or if you have special designations like the associate chair or the coordinator for our graduate program. So we release them from some of the teaching requirements. So that's how teaching is basically handled.
Before someone jumps in and answers that really important question in the chat, I just wanted to validate and agree and appreciate the when Dr. Brown said that the auditorium is a default, and also Dr. Lawrence mentioned it was the experiential hands-on learning is really the goal, and I think Dr. Bohr, you mentioned that as well, and I think that the really special, wonderful, nurturing thing about these institutions that are represented here today is that that's our value. You know, we want people coming in who value the experiential kind of student contact, and even though they have a large class, they're really reaching out beyond their schedules many times and their energy levels to really serve the needs of the students. And in our case, it's the needs of the community. And so I'll just quickly say that our class sizes is the easiest for me to address. It's ratio of 11 to 1. 11 students. In our sciences, we have some we're also servicing our student majors through our sciences, nursing, as was mentioned by Dr. Brown, and then people that are going into a pharmacy or that are going into other related fields to be practitioners. So we have 20 to 25, and many of our faculty in the sciences teach a 4-4. So equivalent to what Dr. Lawrence was saying. It's not every semester, thank goodness, they exhaust themselves and ask for release time, but many times they're asked to do over and above what the expectation is of other institutions. And so I just wanted to add that. We have community obligations because we are engaging students who are underprepared. And so we have an extended responsibility to our underprepared students. They work in the fields until 4 a.m., come to an 8 o'clock lab in the morning. And so we want to extend as much as we can, as much mentoring as we can in those situations.
Great. So just following up on that one question about formal expectations of professional development, do each of your departments or institutions expect that or be able to provide that for either current faculty or existing faculty? What does that look like?
So one of the stories I love to tell is the first time I heard the word pedagogy was after I'd been hired. So for those of you who are hearing it for the first time, now that I've said it, pedagogy relates to the ways in which a teacher promotes learning through the actions that they undertake, whether they be in the classroom or some other type of space, a laboratory, and so on and so forth. That's my paraphrase, of course. So it's going to vary a lot from institution to institution. The one thing that I can say is if you have advanced training in teaching and learning, it's helpful from the standpoint of what I like to call work-life balance, because if you're better at teaching, it's easier for you to engage with it. And so if you have other responsibilities in service and scholarship, you can find a better balance. I think that was one thing that was critical for me coming into a space like Morehouse, having had a background in teaching and having taught a lot before as both a graduate student, not so much in industry, but that sort of, when I think about my role, I'm a middle child. So that means something to different people. But in my family, it meant that I ordered the pizza. It meant that if we met new people, I had to introduce my brothers, right? So talking comes naturally to me. So I was very comfortable in this space. So engaging with my students in the classroom didn't feel like it was taking time away from other activities. But I think what's important to note as well is that because students change, like average student that meets me today has had very different life experiences. They have no memory of a world without smartphones, for example. I have a very vivid memory of a world without smartphones. And so how it is that we navigate these spaces as, myself, the immigrant to the technology space, where now I'm engaging native peoples, if you will, that live in a technology space because they've only grown up within that idea. In order to better meet them, it's to my advantage to seek out continuing training in how it is that this generation students learn, and how it is they take in information, and in some ways how they view me as their teacher. It was interesting to note that over this past year, where much of our interaction was online, students' largest concerns about most of their faculty related to approachability. Being knowledgeable didn't even crack the top 5. So that's something that's an important takeaway in terms of it, is how you engage people. And that's not something I necessarily would have thought about when I was a graduate student, because, frankly, the job I trained for isn't necessarily the job I have. Although the skills that I developed training as a PhD student in chemistry are highly transferable, because at the end of the day, we're really just solving problems.
Okay, so, Chico, you want to say something, and then we'll move on to our last general topic.
We can move on. Yeah, you can move on.
Okay. Okay, so one of the, obviously in the title of our panel discussion was really focused on mentoring and advising students. And so a really important component of the success of our students is developing those mentoring relationships. And so if you would each maybe take a minute or two just to describe what mentoring means to you and some tips for our audience.
Since I had come off earlier, I'll go ahead and finish mine here. So no, I think that is key. And definitely if you're coming into, I would say, the HBCU space, it would be advisable to really try to develop that skill as far as mentoring and advising. Being able to pick up on when students have a talent sometimes in the classroom. That is one thing I know for me that was valuable in going to an HBCU. For one, I was a first generation college student and was kind of out of my sorts in Atlanta versus where I was coming from. So I was, kind of reserved and shy in the classroom. But it took my freshman honors biology professor to recognize, okay, I think this student has a little bit of talent, and he reached out to me. So, it was one of those things where he reached out to see that he saw some potential. And that's one thing I have carried forward. And that's what I love about teaching here at North Carolina A&T and teaching at an HBCU. You have that sort of flexibility in being in a smaller classroom setting. And then you just have that ability to reach out and ask students directly, hey, do you have an interest in this? Or I see that you was at this workshop. Are you interested in this opportunity? And so those kind of opportunities come that way or at least that's the way we provide a lot of them to the students. And so then therefore just getting comfortable with the student, attending different functions that the university has. HBCU has a certain culture. Homecoming is around the corner, those kind of things. So getting involved and showing that you have just an interest in their lives outside of just being in the classroom. So I think that's important.
I wanted to further describe our location of our university. So we are rural, isolated. We're in the middle of an agricultural community. We're a commuter college, so we don't have the access to students that many people do that have them in a dormitory or that they're involved in campus life in various ways. And so our students are living at home or living with relatives or living with children of their own. And so we have a responsibility to the community to also educate them as we mentor our students and realize our students are on a path of loss in many ways, moving beyond their family members' education, moving beyond the social status that they have grown up in, moving beyond the landscape of the reservation and of the Hispanic, Latino, Latina, cultural geographies. And so it's so mentoring for us begins in a microcosm of providing all of the relationships that they'll experience within a larger institution. in a very small format. So we start with advising, and we have a mentoring circle of advisors. And so we have a community member advising the student, or in the session. We have a faculty member who is a faculty member who's either Native American or Latino, Latina. And then we have the student. And so it's a conversation and a dialogue of mentoring in a circle that really grounds the student and helps the parent who's going to be supporting that academic journey, or that relative. Many people live with extended relatives. It helps them know what the pathway looks like for their student, and more importantly, how they can contribute to the community through this education. And so it's truly a circle that goes from the student to the community, and that comes back. And so one way we accommodate that I accommodate that, is that I do have 2 grants that are humanities oriented, but I am a member of our institution is, as Brian knows, a member of the Leadership Alliance, which provides some fantastic mentoring that's exclusively geared in many cases to our students, as we have conversations about placing students in different institutions during summer research. And so how we accommodate that when they return is that we understand they have a story to tell about their leaving sometimes the Valley for the very first time in their life, in their 20s and 30s, some of them. And so we have what we call a community gathering dinner. And we invite all the relatives, families, and everyone into our largest space on campus. And we provide food, and our students stand up as a panel would, each one presenting their work to the community and to the members of their families. And so they bring it back as a collective. They leave as an individual, they come back and share to a collective. And so they don't sever the tie between academia and their community selves, right away. And we try to have that be a process that is endured, piece by piece. And then when they come back to teach at our institution, either part-time or as a visiting professor, they have that connection that is extended and been preserved for them. So mentoring to us and advising is a circle concept. It's done respectfully with each student. And then it goes on the relational part that Dr. Rory mentioned, that reaching back and forth to that student for continuing conversations is extended for their entire time with us.
So when I started at Morgan, I had the image of, your typical college student, go to class, study, do assignments, hand them in on time. And I hit some realities when I came to Morgan that, just kind of made me look at things a little bit differently. One of the things that I had to take into account was that even though I am at an institution where the majority of the students are from underrepresented groups, there are still cultural differences between students. So I've been involved with a number of workshops that revolve around cultural sensitivity, which is really key, I think, in terms of developing relationships with students. Also letting the students know and your own experiences as an undergraduate. I've had, some rough times while I was an undergraduate, and letting them know that you're human and that you've experienced some of the things that they've gone through. But the cultural sensitivity part was something that was kind of key for me in terms of building relationships and just understanding their backgrounds, their upbringings, their family dynamics, and just recognizing that and moving forward after recognizing all of the things that they're actually going through. And every student doesn't fall within the same cookie cutter type of thing. So that was big for me for building relationships and then developing a mentoring relationships with the students as well. They'll feel more comfortable and more likely to talk to you and discuss academics and even personal stuff sometimes as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Brian, did you want to have the last minute on mentoring?
Sure. I love what Winona said, that, it's important that when you think about mentorship, you're not just part of a student's educational journey, you're part of their life journey, which means in some ways, it doesn't confine you to the space that they're in while they're getting that education. I think it's important we understand that mentorship is something that can happen over a lifetime, in that our students, while they're with us, are having to live a life in the world. One of my colleagues from graduate school, Jason Sello, who's a professor at University of California, San Francisco, said to me, he loved being a student at the time he was, because the faculty were like his cool aunts and uncles, right? The ones that would take him places his parents wouldn't let him go. Right? And so the type of experiences that we can have with our students inside of the classroom can allow them to expand who they are. They can imagine being bigger than themselves. And so when we think about mentorship at Morehouse, it's really about how do we help students understand not only that they can grow, but in some ways that that's their responsibility as they go through life, which is, very different than I think the expectations that I certainly had as a new faculty member in terms of what my primary engagement would be, which was around, okay, you're going to come to my office hours and you're going to talk to me about chemistry, not about the fact that, you got evicted last night and your parents don't have anywhere to live, right? And so you find out sometimes that you have to counsel students through some of these struggles, and being in the space that we are, most of the students at Morehouse come from a financial background where they're struggling at home. Where they're expected at some point in time, almost entirely over, at some point almost for certain during their academic journey, that they're going to have to help support their families in some way, shape, or form, whether it's during their time as a student or after. And that sort of changes the dynamic in terms of what a college experience can be. But recognizing that and seeing our students as whole people, not just as a person in the classroom that I only have to engage over these 50 minutes 3 times a week, but that you're helping them understand that they're going to be a person in the world and that they can be hugely impactful if they allow themselves to be, is one of the things that's important. Another bit of advice I'll say is that you can be friendly, but you can't be friends. And I think that's especially important to understand now that we live in a world with social media. I will allow a lot of my students will want to follow me in social media, which I'm perfectly fine with because I don't post anything. My wife does all that. And that's just, I always say that things I don't have time for in my life, number one is social media, because of all the other hats that I wear. But it's important that you understand that there is a sort of mentor-mentee, we like to say that sort of master-trainer relationship that you have with your students. And so it's important to delineate that. But I think that's the, I honestly, I couldn't have said it better than I think Winona did. You're part of the student's community, not apart from that community. So.
Can I just add a quick, Brian? I put it in the chat, but I heard Shanna Green Benjamin read portions of her book, Half in Shadow. It was beautifully done. If you're really interested in what a mentoring relationship can offer your life as a holistic kind of experience, please read that book. I bought it. I'm still reading it. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful testament. Nellie McKay was involved in creating with Henry Louis Gates Jr., the African American Anthology of Literature. And so it's an important testimony that Shannon offers as a graduate student. She goes back in her memory and talks about those struggles she had as a graduate student, how Nellie McKay had struggles as a woman of color from a background that was not a middle-class background coming into academia. So I think on many points, it's a really wonderful, wonderful resource and a wonderful book, and you can support a wonderful author who's also a Mellon Fellow. So please do that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Winona, and thank you all for your insights into these 3 topics. I know we have a short amount of time to move into our next part of today's event and to give our participants a little more closer time with each of our panelists. And so what we're going to do is to do likely probably 10 minutes of 2 rounds with individual panelists. We'll also have some facilitators. So Kitch Barnacle and Kate Diamond from CIRTL Central, Whitney Edwards is a postdoc from UNC Chapel Hill, and myself will be helping to moderate each of the individual breakout rooms. I've posted some questions here. We'll put these in the chat, a little more focused maybe on the application process or what our future faculty might be questioning about the application process. So these are suggestions of topics, but I really encourage our participants to also ask their own questions in each of the breakouts. So what we'll do is do one round of breakouts, and then we'll come back to the main room and we'll just move our panelists. So you'll have the same participants then in the second round of the breakouts. And so I'll ask, actually, I'll stop sharing here. And let me make sure that we have these questions in the chat so that everyone can follow along if they need to. And then I'll ask Kate and/or Kitch to facilitate the breakouts. And again, we'll probably do this for just about 10 minutes. So then we can move, come back to the main room, switch our panelists for a second round of conversation.
All right, I'm going to move people into breakouts and hopefully it goes well. Let us know if it doesn't.
We're at the bottom of the hour. To wrap up our event, our panel discussion, I just want to acknowledge all the great facilitators we had today, all of our excellent panelists. Thank you so much for taking this time with us. I always learn so much from my colleagues and learn so much new things today. I really want to thank all of our participants. Hopefully that you all received some good advice and some new directions perhaps. And yes, please feel free to give us your feedback on this session. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Have a great rest of your day, your week, your fall semesters. Thank you for joining us and be well.
Thank you for
One quick thing to add to your acronyms. I just thought of it with my group this morning. That had a conversation this morning. DEI, B, belonging. So diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. I think that didn't reach my ears yet. I'm sure everybody else probably has a different story, but I loved that in a conversation this morning. DEI, B, I love that.
Thank you, Winona. That's very, very important. Thank you so much.